I didn't even know the Beatles were in India.
I was just a kid with a camera. The pictures, I put them away for 32 years. I just forgot about them.
India, a place of spiritual enlightenment. What happens when a 23-year-old Westerner goes there in search of himself and he finds the Beatles are there too?
I was heartbroken.
Your story is incredible. True happiness is not out there. True happiness lies within.
They took me into their group.
Within 30 seconds, they really were just themselves.
This is the bungalow where I shot those pictures.
We see everything for moments like this. Some of these are the best shots we've seen of the Beatles.
The Beatles were the biggest celebrities in the world, not only for their music, but also for their personality.
The Beatles' visit to the ashram was a turning point in 20th century consciousness.
The kingdom of heaven is within you. You know, that's all it means, to have a peep inside.
The time at the ashram was their single most creative capsule.
They had nothing else to do here but meditate and write songs.
Welcome on Words of Wisdom today, two-time Emmy Award-winning director and producer of over 300 films and television productions, Paul Saltzman. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you very, very much, Colin.
My pleasure. We're going to explore the most creative periods in the Beatles' career and Paul's own fascinating movie, Meeting the Beatles in India. Let's start by explaining how you discovered transcendental meditation and ended up in Rishikesh in 1968.
Well, it's a fascinating story for me too. I was 23 years old. I was working at the National Film Board of Canada in Montreal. I'm from Toronto, and I was at the early stages of my filmmaking. I hadn't yet made a film of my own. I had worked on other people's films, and I had started in television with our equivalent of the BBC called the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. And I thought my life was going well. I was proud of myself with a small p, not a capital P, a small p, because I'd been brought up to follow the golden rule, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. That led me to be a civil rights worker in Mississippi and do voter registration in 1965, which was dangerous. I was arrested and jailed and punched in the head by a member of the Ku Klux Klan. Got away from him and his three friends, took him to court. The FBI asked me if I was out of my effing mind to take him to court because it was dangerous. And I had worked in television. I'd been a co-host of a television show, a national television show that was a youth public affairs show. I was working at the film board. I drove a sports car. I dated. I thought everything was going well. I woke up one morning in my little rented room, and I had what was really a shocking thought, which was that I realized there were parts of myself I didn't like, and I'd never had that thought. And in a certain way, I don't think I was that conscious about who I was, even though I felt I was doing good in our world. And what happened was really otherworldly and magical. I sat up on the edge of my bed and I said out loud without thinking. And the key was without thinking, because if what came out of my mouth was, I said, what do I do about this? It just came out. And I heard my soul talk to me for the first time, and I didn't believe in a soul. I happen to have been brought up as an atheist. There's no soul, there's no spirit, there's no God. That's how I was brought up. But what I heard was a very deep inner voice. It wasn't my voice, but it was all loving and all knowing. Now, just think about that. When do we hear something that's all loving and all knowing? It was this inner voice, and it was all calming. And it said these words. It said, well, Paul, if you really want to look at yourself more carefully, you might want to get away from the environment you grew up in. And I said out loud in this strange conversation without thinking, the mind is a brilliant computer, but it gets in the way of the heart, right? I learned that. And I said out loud, where do I go? And that inner voice said, India. And that was the end of the conversation. And I had no interest in India. I didn't know what meditation was. I didn't know what mysticism was. No idea. But I felt so moved that I got myself to India by working on a film board film as the sound recordist. I didn't have enough money to go to India, so I needed to do something. My girlfriend and I said goodbye to each other. We both were in many tears because we didn't want to part. We loved each other dearly. I get to India. I work on the film for 6 weeks from Bombay up the coast and into New Delhi. Get to New Delhi, get my first mail from Trisha, open the letter excitedly, and the first line is, "Dear Paul, I've moved in with Henry." And I was devastated. I was shattered. I've had a few heartbreaks. Most of us have had a few heartbreaks. That was the worst before or ever since. And somebody said to me, "Why don't you try meditation for the heartbreak?" I went to a lecture with him. He said, "I'm going to a lecture tonight at New Delhi University by the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi." I didn't know who that was. And he said, "Do you want to come?" I said, yes. This auditorium was packed. And I only remember one thing the Maharishi said, but it was what I needed to hear clearly. He said, meditation takes you beneath and below your daily worries and concerns to a place of inner rejuvenation from which you come back renewed and refreshed. I thought, that's what I need, right? So I went 2 days later to the ashram, and it was a bit of kismet. It was a bit of fate. It was a bit of magic, because I didn't know the Beatles were in India. We'd been on the road. I hadn't read newspapers. I hadn't watched the television. And I didn't know the ashram was closed. I found my way to the ashram. I just asked people, "Do you know where the Maharishi's ashram is?" And eventually I found my way there. And I was told that the ashram was closed. And I said, "Can I wait?" And because I was in agony, I didn't know what to do. And interesting enough, Colin, it was not good news the Beatles were there. It was not good news, because I'm in agony and I can't get in. I didn't know what to do, so I waited, and I waited outside the gate for 8 days. I slept in a tent. They had a tent there by chance. I had a sleeping bag. And 8 days later, I was allowed in, and I was taught meditation. It took 5 minutes. And I was told by this wonderful man, Raghvendra, who turned out to be my angel. And this is the story of the film. And the reason I did the film was I wanted to pass on. Again, the do unto others is part of my being. It just happens to be the way I am. So I'm a filmmaker, storyteller for really one purpose, and that is for the joy of passing on to others, just as I am joyful when somebody gives me a leg up. I'm hugely grateful when somebody shares a wisdom with me. Here's one of the wisdoms a teacher I worked with shared with me, which changed my life. It just as an example. He said, "You know, Paul, you can't raise consciousness unconsciously." Well, that was life-changing. Whoa, that's worth its weight in gold. Who knew? Right, you can't raise consciousness unconsciously. It doesn't work. So you have to be conscious of becoming more aware, becoming more heartful. Anyway, I wait outside the gate. I get in. Raghvendra, who's an angel, and that's in the film, teaches me meditation. He says, "I'll now leave you alone to meditate on your own. You're now welcome to spend your days in the ashram and take your meals with us, but there's no extra bed, so you'll have to still stay in the tent." I said, "Great." I don't know what meditation is, but he gives me a mantra, and I do this transcendental meditation for 30 minutes. And I finish the meditation, and it's an absolute miracle. The knife in the heart, which is what it felt like, was gone. The agony in the head, which was there, is gone. And I'm in a state of bliss. I'm stoned. It's like I'd had a joint. It's like I had taken a psychedelic. I was in a state of bliss. So I come out of the meditation room. I'm not thinking of Beatles at all. They're not even in my mind. I'm just so relieved not to be in agony. And there's this miracle meditation. Who knew, right? And that's when I walking through the ashram, and I'm not thinking of that, and I'm just looking around, and I see John about 150 feet away sitting at a table, and I can tell it's Paul with his back to me. And I can see there's other people, but there's bushes and trees, so I can't really see everybody, and I walk over to them. So that's how that happened.
And John was going through his own relationship traumas at the time, and I believe he gave you some very valuable advice.
Oh, he was a dear. Well, I'll tell you what happened when I walked over the table, because it's great fun and it's also magic. I found myself using the word magic more and more about 20 years ago. And I know how I use it, but I thought, I wonder what the dictionary says. So after about 5 years of using the word magic more often than normal, like I am with you, I go to this big Oxford Etymological Dictionary. It's a huge thing. It's about that big and it weighs about 12 pounds. And I look up the word magic, and as soon as I start reading down, I realize, which I didn't know, that the way they're numbered, 1, 2, 3, and there were 25 meanings for the word magic, is the most common is number 1, and the most obscure usage is number 25 in this case. And down around 23 or 24, I find exactly what I'm talking about. And this is what it says, and it's beautiful. It says, magic, that which is real, but we as yet do not understand. That which is real, but as yet we do not understand. So I'll tell you about meeting them, because it's kind of magical. So I walk over, and I'm not in thought. This is so fascinating. Following the heart is a wonderful thing to do, and it requires not being possessed by the brain. You know, we all have monkey mind. You should have done this better. Why did you screw that up? You know, no, you gotta just put that aside and let the heart rule, let the heart speak. This is a wonderful computer. It's a shitty guidance system. The heart is a wonderful guidance system. It's a shitty computer. And one of the most wise sages once said to me, if he had to sum up all his books and all his experiences and all his lectures into one sentence, he said, it's all about integrating the head and the heart. Isn't that beautiful? It's all about integrating the head and the heart. So I see John and I see Paul, and I'm in a state of bliss, in an altered state. And I find myself, honest to God, Colin, I don't think it. I don't think Beatles. I'll walk over. I find myself curving, and it's like, oh, I'm curving towards them because I'm in this altered state. I'm in this blissful state. And I get about halfway to them, and I just notice with detachment, oh, my heart's beating a little faster, but I'm not hooked by it. I'm just sort of noticing awareness. So I get to the end of the table, and it's a long, double long table, and there's John and Paul, George and Ringo, Pattie Boyd, Cynthia Lennon, Maureen Starkey, Jane Asher, Paul's girlfriend, Mike Love of the Beach Boys, Donovan, Mia Farrow, the American actress, and Mal Evans, their roadie. There's 12 of them sitting there. And they're talking, so I don't want to interrupt. So I'm standing at the end of the table. I'm 2 feet from John on one side. I'm 2 feet from Paul on the other side. And I'm quiet, because I'm quiet and in a quiet state. So they notice somebody's standing there, and they stop talking. And John looks up at me. And without any mind interference, I just say, may I join you? He says, sure, mate, pull up a chair. Paul turns to me and says, come and sit here. And they pull a chair to the end of the table, and I sit down. And as soon as my bum hits the seat, to my shock, no shit, to my shock, I hear a scream in my head, eek, it's the Beatles. Now, I saw them live in Toronto in '64. Their music had already changed my life. But I have never said, eek, it's the Beatles. So without thinking again, before I have a chance to think, I hear my soul talk to me for the second time in my life. This deep, inner, all-loving, all-reassuring voice. And it says, hey, Paul, they're just ordinary people like you. Everyone farts and is afraid in the night. That's what it said. And as soon as that happened, before I have a chance to think, John turns to me. So this is all magical in its own way. It's real, but it's like, whoa. John turns to me, and in his brilliant mind and wonderful Liverpudlian humor, his wry, digging sense of humor, he says to me, so you're American then? And it's not a compliment. And I say, no Canadian. And he turns to the rest of the group and he says, ah, he's from one of the colonies. Now we're all laughing. And he turns back to me and he says, so you're still worshiping Her Highness then, right? He's playing with me. He's toying with me. He's jesting with me. Beautiful, beautiful. And I say, no, not personally. And then Paul and Ringo start teasing me about how we have the Queen on our money, which we still do have the Queen on our money. No, the King now. And I say, well, we may have the Queen on our money, but hey, she lives with you guys. And we're all laughing. And John turns back to the rest of the group and he says, ah, you see, they still have a sense of humor in the colonies. And that was it. They just took me into their group. I just hung out with them for the next week. I could have stayed for weeks and weeks. I came back to see if my girlfriend Trisha and I could get back together. It didn't work. In a way, it would have been better to stay, but I did what my heart said. And I spent a week with them. And yes, John's advice to me, we would meet at this table, long table out by the cliff. We're right close to the edge of the cliff and it's exquisite, the ashram. It's in a protected wildlife forest. It's on a cliff overlooking the Ganges, about 200 feet below. The town of Rishikesh is across the Ganges. And the Ganges there is very wide, probably a kilometer wide, I'm not sure, but quite wide. And so it's idyllic. So we would meet there, have chai and cookies and sit and chat when not meditating somewhere else. And one day, and I'm part of the group, I'm just accepted because of the play, you see. And it's clear, to me, it's clear. So the fan screams, eek, it's the Beatles. And the fan is sent packing by the soul. So it says, no, they're just ordinary people. Everyone farts and is afraid in the night. So I think they felt I didn't want anything from them. In fact, something, it was crazy. I never thought Beatles for the next week I sat with them. To the point that I never had my picture taken with them. And I could have had my picture taken with them like we were buddies for a week with the whole group. I never thought of asking for an autograph. Like, it wasn't a thought, oh, I better not ask for an autograph. It just wasn't even in my brain. So one day, we're all sitting there and everyone gets up to go, either to prepare for lunch or to prepare for dinner or something. And John and I are sitting there. And I'm finishing a cup of chai and he's writing music in his notebook, writing lyrics. And then he's wearing his little health, British health
glasses. Yes, yeah.
Those round ones, right?
Yeah.
And he finishes writing, he closes the book and he looks up at me and in a very dear way, he says to me, so what are you doing here? Because no one was allowed in the ashram, right? The world's press kept arriving. Like when I was waiting the 8 days, there would be 20, 30 press people from all over the world coming to interview the Beatles. What's happening, right? They're the most famous people on the planet in 1968, right? Sort of the most famous people on the planet. So John is just saying, so what are you doing here? And I said to him very briefly, I said, heartbreak, meditation, the miracle of meditation. And he looks at me and he says, ah, yes, love can be very tough on us sometimes, can't it, Paul? And I said, yeah. And he looks away in the distance and there's a pause. And then he looks it back at me and in a very kind, loving voice, he says, but Paul, the really great thing about love is you always get another chance. He could not have said something more kind in that moment because I still was dealing with, Trisha said, I'm living with Henry. I'm madly in love with her. I'm still dealing with heartbreak, but it's not an agony. It's a longing as opposed to a broken heart agony. So that was John's incredible caring.
And of course, the background to that was obviously the relationship with Cynthia at the time and having met Yoko, I guess.
Yep. And what we didn't know, what I read about later, was he was getting letters from her post restaurant at the post office in Rishikesh, and he would go or send Mal Evans, who knows, to get these letters. And Cynthia when we read what her book said, Cynthia thought the ashram was an opportunity to reconnect for their marriage, but she didn't know that he was already gone. So
It's very
that's all.
interesting. It's very interesting what you were saying on John's final interview. In fact, on the day that he died, he was talking about the most creative stuff that he wrote came when he wasn't thinking.
I read that last interview, and I'll tell you why I remember it, but I don't remember that, and that's beautiful. Thank you for that reminder.
Yes, it's the RKO interview. So I'm going to be talking to Laurie Kay in a few days' time. And Laurie was the last person to interview John, but that was one of the striking things that the many things that he said. What impact do you think meditation had on the creative process of all the Beatles whilst they were there? Because it was the most creative period, as I said at the beginning of their career. They wrote some 48 songs whilst at the ashram. Do you put a lot of that down to meditation?
I put it down to a couple things, and and I'm glad you're asking this, but it occurs to mention the reason I made this film. I had been wanting to make it for 15 years, and I approached Apple, and I, introduced myself, and I had 2 meetings in London with Jonathan Clyde, a lovely young man. I say young. And with the CEO of Apple in one of those meetings. And I said, let's do this together, because what I wanted to do was I wanted to focus on not my story. That's just the vehicle for the film. That's just gives it a beginning and a middle and an end. But I wanted to explore meditation and that creativity. And they said, nice idea. We're busy. We don't do much. We don't do many projects because we're a small company. And eventually they said, no, kind of forget it. So then I did it on my own. But the point is, my joy of making the film is several things. One, that I could tell stories about the Beatles and John and George specifically, because I had the most intimate connection with them. I also had a lovely connection with Ringo and with Paul. So I wanted to share that, because they were just ordinary people with me, and that's worth sharing. And I wanted to share about that creativity and the role of meditation in it. And frankly, I wanted to interview Paul and Ringo for my film about that, about creativity, about meditation. Because Paul, I think, says he still meditates from time to time, and I think Ringo says, I'm not sure, says the same. But you're asking what my thought of this is, which is meditation is a key. It's just a key, but it's a magical key that connects you to your own soul, that connects you to whatever is the divine energy on the planet. Call it God, call it goddess, whatever you want to call it, whatever is that divine presence in the world, which I didn't believe in till I first heard my soul talk to me. Yeah, there's no such thing as that, right? I'm a scientifically based rationalist. I still am. But hey, when you experience something, you might as well, if it's valuable, value it. So meditation is really a key to your own inner consciousness and to the greater consciousness, whatever that is, and to the magic of creativity. So on a certain level, it's like prayer, connecting to the divine. On another level, it's like going to a place of stillness and quiet within the self, wherein you discover your own connection to the divine presence within you and within the others and within the universe. So yeah, creativity, absolutely. David Lynch, who I interviewed for the film, he's in my film, and he's wonderful. He says, in effect, it's like fishing for the big fish, right? He says it unlocks your creativity, meditation, and transcendental meditation is just one form. There's many forms of meditation. Hey, whatever suits you, find whatever suits you. Being quiet, even if you don't meditate, being quiet in a forest, being quiet in nature, being quiet by the ocean. Those are all ways that we connect with our inner essence.
Talking about the magic of creativity, You were there at the very early stages of Paul and John running through Obladi Oblada. How infused was with John about the song at that stage, at that embryonic stage?
How what was John?
How infused, how excited, how engaged was he? Because later on it became a source of discontent between the band, that particular song. But you thought performed in somewhat more happy circumstances.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. What happened was really simple. I'm going back to my tent from somewhere in the ashram, and I'm walking down the path, which was also a sort of informal road that ran and runs to this day in front of the bungalows that were the main places the Beatles were staying. And the ruins of those bungalows are still there. And by the way, one of my joys, obviously you can tell from my language, joy is big in my life. And if we have time, it's worth a definition of joy, but I'll come back to that if you want to. So I'm walking past these bungalows, and there's Ringo and Paul and John sitting there. And John and Paul are playing their Martin D28 guitars. Ringo's just sitting with them, and they're singing. And the only time I think of getting my camera as a proactive thing, because I was with them a week, I took out my camera twice. I never thought of it. And I had lots of film. I just didn't think of it. So I go to my tent and I get my camera and I come back. And I walk through the gate. There's a wire chain link fence to keep the goats out of the gardens, right? And I come through the gate and they pause their singing, and I had heard fragments of songs I knew and things I didn't know. That's as I was passing by, and as I came back, that's what I'm hearing. And I go through the gate and they pause because I'm arriving, and John says, "Hey, Paul, how are you?" And I say, "Great, how are you guys?" And I go sit beside Ringo. And then they start singing, go back to what they're doing, and they're singing Obladi Oblada Bra Wawa How the Life Goes On. Only that, only those words over and over. And they're singing it with joy, and they're working with it, meaning they're slowing it down and speeding it up, and they're bending the words, they're playing with it. And in that moment, I understood in my psyche the magic of the Beatles, the joy they brought us, the joy, think of it, when a music comes on the radio now of a song of theirs, I'm driving, and all of a sudden I'm smiling. The joy is just coming through. And I think that's part of the reason that generation after generation, I think the other reason is that what they sung about is key to living. All you need is love, all you need is love, all you need is love. That truly is a law of physics. We just don't realize how much it's a law of physics. Real love, as opposed to the various forms of way people use the word,
and Obladi is almost the mantra in itself, isn't it, really? But it's so great to hear you talking about them performing that song in a joyful way, because later on it went to be a source of discontent.
Yeah.
They recorded over 100 takes in the studio. John didn't like the song at that stage, and the band were fed up, I think, being told what to play and how to play it by Paul. There are various accounts. And a year later, in their final board meeting, John even went so far as to suggest that songs like Obladi should be given to Mary Hopkin rather than being put on a Beatles album. So it's quite a turnaround, and very gratifying to hear them performing in a more joyful manner. Because it's a great song.
It's a wonderful song. And what happened, just to add one little piece, so they're playing it, and I have my camera, so I take a few pictures, and one of the pictures on my website is called Obladi Oblada, and it's Paul looking into the camera. And what happened was this. So I didn't take many pictures because I had, they would take pictures of each other. John and Mal and George, no, maybe Ringo, I'm not sure. There were three of them had Nikon cameras with them. I had my Pentax camera. Maybe four of them had cameras, I'm not sure. And Ringo had a 16 millimeter movie camera, and he asked me to shoot some film for him. And that was a nice moment. I'll tell you about it in a second if we have time. But so I take a few pictures, not many. When I walked through the gate and John said hello, he went to scratch his ear, and I just happened to take a picture. It's my favorite picture of John. It's the one called John. And again, you can find it out there and on my website. And what I love about it is if you look at his eyes and the feeling in his face, he's very present and he's very far away in that exact moment. And it's a beauty, and his guitar is across his chest. It's one of these moments, just a magic moment. So what happened is they're singing and they're working on it. I look over, and again, one of my joys making the film is I could tell this story and I don't have any visuals. So I could use graphic novel illustration style to tell stories of John saying, the really great thing about love, Paul, is you always get another chance. And that part of me that is the one who shares for the purpose of gaining, you know, which I've been given many gifts, like you can't raise consciousness unconscious. I've been given many of those gifts, which I take into my heart, and they help my life be better. So I like passing them on. That's my filmmaker kind of being. So I look over while they're singing, and under Paul's toe of his sandal is a little torn piece of yellow paper about this big. And I look at it, I'm only about 4 feet from it, so I can read it. I'm sitting beside Ringo, and Ringo's between me and John, and then there's Paul. And on the piece of paper is written the words, Obladi Oblada Bra Wala, how the life goes on. And you can see Paul is looking down at it in one of my photos, because they're just learning it. I would say they're just learning it. They're playing with it. And they take a break to catch their breath. And it's just at the moment I'm taking a picture, the picture of him looking down at it. I take this picture, and then they pause, and he looks up at me, and with a very dear smile, he says, that's all there is so far. We don't have any of the words yet. And then they went back to playing it. But it was joy. John was in joy. Paul was in joy. Ringo and I were sitting there. You know, how do you sit there, you pick up that feeling, right? So yeah, it was a magic moment.
I think some of your photographs are amongst the best photos ever taken of the Beatles, because they're candid, and it really seems to capture their true essence. One of the things about that time at the ashram, I believe cigarettes, drugs, and alcohol were all banned, which must have helped in the creative process for the Beatles. But there are photos of Mia Farrow smoking. How respectful of the rules were the Beatles?
I can only tell you what I know. I can't tell you what I don't know. What I know is that Mia Farrow and Donovan were both smokers. I don't know about the others. And I know that because one day I'm returning to my tent. It's the end of the day. The light is really low. And I run into Donovan and Mia, and they're sort of hidden at the side of the ashram among the trees having a smoke. And I take a few pictures, including the one of Mia with the dog, with Arjun, the dog, very sweet. And the only picture I took of Donovan. And I tell you, when I took those pictures, Colin, it was so dark, I thought these are never going to turn out. But it so happened that I was using Ektachrome 64. And I wasn't a photographer. I just was a kid with my camera. What I didn't know about Ektachrome 64 is that it was known for having a terrific latitude of 2 stops. So I think they're never going to turn out. But they're darkish, but they turn out. And then there's another shot I took of Mia at a different time, and she's sitting at the table by the cliff, and she's smoking a cigarette. And again, it was low light, so I held the camera as still as I could, but there was a bit of shake in the camera. And one of the nice things about that photo is, you know, the end of the cigarette has 2 images because it moved, two glowing ends to the cigarette. So I didn't see any drugs. I didn't see any alcohol. I didn't hear any talk about drugs or alcohol. You know, some people say there was. I don't think so. I don't know. I don't know what I didn't see, but Mia and Donovan were smokers.
Paul, thank you so much for your time today and recollecting all these great stories. I'd like to have you back again, so hopefully we'll have you on soon.
Anytime.
And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much, Paul.
My pleasure.